The certified letter arrived at 9:47 a.m. on my 25th birthday, bearing the embossed letterhead of Whitman and Associates Trust Law. I almost didn't sign for it. The delivery driver waited patiently as I balanced my coffee mug and the pen, my silk pajamas still wrinkled from sleep. 25 felt significant somehow, like a threshold I'd been unconsciously approaching my entire life. Little did I know that this single envelope would shatter everything I believed about my family. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Jessica Chen, and up until that Tuesday morning in October, I thought I understood my place in the world perfectly. I lived in a cramped studio apartment in downtown Portland, working double shifts at Morrison's Coffee House to afford the $1,200 monthly rent. My parents, Robert and Linda Chen, owned a successful accounting firm in the suburbs, but they'd always emphasized the importance of independence and earning your own way. Character is built through struggle, Jess, my father would say whenever I hinted at needing financial help. We didn't have family money when we started out, and look how well we did. My mother would nod approvingly, adding, "The Patel family down the street spoiled their daughter with handouts, and now she's 32 with no direction in life. We love you too much to let that happen." I'd grown up believing this narrative completely. My parents drove modest Honda Civics despite their business success. We lived in a comfortable but unremarkable 3-bedroom ranch house in Beaverton. Family vacations were camping trips to Oregon state parks, not European adventures. When I graduated from Portland State with my marketing degree, they attended the ceremony with pride, but made it clear that my adult life was mine to fund. Working at the coffee shop wasn't my dream job, but I told myself it was temporary. I'd been applying for marketing positions for 8 months, but the entry-level market was brutal. Most required experience I didn't have, and the ones that didn't barely paid more than I made in tips. My college roommate, Emma Rodriguez, had landed a position at a tech startup immediately after graduation, thanks to her father's connections. But my parents had no industry relationships to leverage. "You'll appreciate success more when you earn it yourself," my mother had said when I mentioned Emma's quick job placement. "Handed opportunities never build real confidence." Every morning, I'd walk the 12 blocks to Morrison's because I couldn't afford both rent and a car payment. My manager, Carlos Hernandez, was understanding about my scheduling needs for job interviews, but I could see the frustration in his eyes when I had to leave during rush hours. The other baristas were mostly college students who lived with their parents or had financial support. I was the anomaly, the graduate still grinding coffee beans and learning latte art at 25. My apartment reflected my financial reality. The studio was on the 4th floor of a converted warehouse with thin walls and unreliable heating. I'd furnished it with pieces from thrift stores and Facebook Marketplace. The bed was a mattress on the floor until I'd saved enough for a basic frame. My dining table was a folding card table I'd inherited from my grandmother. The refrigerator hummed constantly and barely kept food cold, but the landlord insisted it was functioning within normal parameters. Despite the challenges, I felt proud of my independence. My parents had raised me to value self-reliance above all else. When high school friends posted photos from family-funded spring break trips or complained about their parents' expectations for their trust fund distributions, I felt slightly superior. I was earning every dollar, learning real-world skills, building character through adversity. The irony, of course, was that this single envelope would shatter everything I believed about my family. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, thick with multiple pages inside. I set my coffee on the windowsill and tore it open carefully, expecting some kind of promotional material or perhaps a legal notice about a class action lawsuit I'd forgotten about joining. Instead, I found a formal letter addressed to Miss Jessica Lynn Chen, primary beneficiary, and dated 3 days earlier. "Dear Miss Chen, please accept our belated birthday wishes as you reach this significant milestone. Per the terms of the Margaret Chen Educational Trust, established by your late paternal grandmother in 1998, you are now eligible to receive the full disbursement of principal and accumulated interest. The current value of your trust stands at $847,000 as of the most recent quarterly statement. Additionally, we have been directed to inform you that annual distributions of $50,000 have been available since your 18th birthday, though we understand from our correspondence with your parents that you elected to defer these payments. I read the paragraph 3 times before the words began to make sense. Margaret Chen was my grandmother, my father's mother, who had died when I was 7. I remember her as a gentle woman who always had peppermints in her purse and who spoke to me in a mixture of English and Mandarin I could barely understand. The letter continued. As per the trust documents, we have been in regular communication with your parents, Robert and Linda Chen, regarding the management of these funds during your minority and early adulthood. Our records indicate that they have been keeping you informed of the trust's status and managing any distributions according to your expressed wishes.
However, given the significance of this milestone birthday and the full transfer of control to you as the primary beneficiary, we felt it appropriate to reach out directly. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the transfer process and your preferences for ongoing management of these assets. My hands started shaking. The coffee mug slipped from the windowsill, shattering on the hardwood floor and spreading dark liquid across the room. I barely noticed. Deferred payments? Expressed wishes? Regular communication with my parents? I had never heard a single word about any trust fund. Not when I'd struggled to pay for college textbooks. Not when I'd eaten ramen noodles for dinner 3 nights a week my senior year because my part-time job barely covered rent. Not when I'd called home in tears last month because I couldn't afford both groceries and the electrical bill. The letter was signed by Martin Whitman, senior partner, with a phone number and email address for immediate contact. I sat on my mattress, still in my pajamas, staring at the letter until the words blurred together. $847,000, nearly $1 million, available since I was 18. 7 years of struggle that apparently didn't need to happen. The studio apartment suddenly felt smaller, more pathetic. The folding table, the thrift store lamp, the single pot I used for all my cooking, everything looked different through the lens of this revelation. I hadn't been building character through necessity. I'd been performing poverty while my parents watched. My phone rang, startling me from my shocked stupor. The caller ID showed Mom, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail, but questions were already burning in my throat. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." My mother's cheerful voice filled the tiny space. "How does 25 feel?" "Interesting question," I said, my voice sounding strangely flat. "I just received a very enlightening letter from Whitman and Associates Trust Law." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Mom? Are you there?" "Oh." Her voice was smaller now, careful. "That letter. We weren't expecting. We thought they understood the arrangement." "What arrangement? The one where you've been lying to me for 7 years?" "Jessica, honey, it's not what you think. We can explain everything. Why don't you come over for dinner tonight? Your father made your favorite..." "My favorite what?" "My favorite meal that I've been too poor to afford. My favorite birthday celebration that I've been funding myself with tips from coffee shop customers." I could hear my father's voice in the background, asking questions I couldn't make out. "We never meant for you to struggle. We just thought... We believed it would be better for your development if you learned independence first. We were protecting you." From my own money? From my grandmother's gift to me? From making the same mistakes we see other young people make? Trust fund children who never learn real responsibility? I hung up. The letter lay on the bed beside me, its formal language suddenly feeling like evidence in a criminal case. Our records indicate that they have been keeping you informed, managing any distributions according to your expressed wishes. They had lied to the law firm. They had told Martin Whitman that I knew about the trust fund, that I had chosen to defer the payments, that I was making informed decisions about my own inheritance. For 7 years, while I'd lived paycheck to paycheck, my parents had been managing nearly $1 million that belonged to me. Money that could have paid for college without loans, money that could have allowed me to take unpaid internships to build my career, money that could have given me the freedom to pursue opportunities instead of just survival. The phone buzzed with the text from my mother. "Please come home tonight. We love you and want to explain." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and began typing an email to Martin Whitman requesting an immediate appointment to discuss my trust fund. The trust fund I was learning about for the first time on my 25th birthday. Outside my window, Portland hummed with the ordinary business of a Tuesday morning. People walking to work, cars navigating traffic, the world proceeding normally while mine tilted completely off its axis. I had spent my entire adult life believing I was strong, independent, self-made. Now I had to reckon with the possibility that I had been manipulated, controlled, and systematically lied to by the two people I trusted most in the world. The broken coffee mug lay in pieces on the floor, dark stains spreading across the wood. It seemed like an appropriate metaphor for everything I thought I knew about my life.
Martin Whitman's office occupied the 32nd floor of the Columbia Center, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of downtown Portland and Mount Hood in the distance. The contrast between this gleaming law firm and my fourth-floor studio couldn't have been more stark. As I sat in the leather chair across from his mahogany desk, I felt underdressed in my only professional outfit, a black blazer from Target and slacks that had seen better days. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. "I appreciate you coming in so quickly, Ms. Chen," Martin said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he opened a thick file folder. He appeared to be in his 60s, with silver hair and the measured way of speaking that comes from decades of handling delicate family matters. "I must say, your email yesterday raised some concerning questions about our communication protocols." I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app, setting it on his desk between us. "Do you mind if I record this conversation? I want to make sure I understand everything correctly." He nodded approvingly. "Given the circumstances, that's quite prudent. Now, let me walk you through the trust documents from the beginning." Martin spread several papers across his desk, each bearing official seals and my grandmother's distinctive signature. The Margaret Chen Educational Trust was established on November 15, 1998, when you were 3 years old. Your grandmother funded it with $400,000 initially, proceeds from selling her restaurant business here in Portland. He pointed to a specific clause highlighted in yellow. The terms were quite specific. Educational expenses were to be covered beginning at age 16. Annual living stipends of $25,000 were authorized starting at 18, increasing to $50,000 at age 21. Full principal control would transfer to you at 25. My throat felt dry. So I should have been receiving money for 7 years? According to the original terms, yes. However, Martin flipped to another section of documents. In 2016, shortly before your 18th birthday, your parents requested a modification meeting. They presented what they described as your written request to defer all distributions until age 25. He slid a handwritten letter across the desk. My breath caught as I recognized the stationery, cream-colored paper with my initials embossed at the top, a graduation gift from my parents when I finished high school. The letter was written in my handwriting. "Dear Mr. Whitman, I am writing to request that all distributions from the Margaret Chen Educational Trust be deferred until my 25th birthday. I believe that receiving money during my college years and early 20s would prevent me from developing the work ethic and financial responsibility that my grandmother would have wanted me to learn.
I understand that this means foregoing approximately $280,000 in distributions over the next 7 years, but I am confident this is the right decision for my personal development. Please coordinate all future trust matters through my parents until the full transfer at 25. Sincerely, Jessica Chen. I stared at the letter, my hands trembling. I never wrote this. Martin's eyebrows rose slightly. Never? I mean, that's my handwriting, but I don't remember writing this at all, and I definitely never asked for anything to be deferred. Miss Chen, this is quite serious. Are you suggesting this letter was forged? I studied the document more carefully. The handwriting was unmistakably mine. The way I dotted my I's, my distinctive capital letters, even the slight rightward slant. But the vocabulary felt wrong. Financial responsibility, personal development. These were my parents' phrases, not mine. Could someone have had me write this without understanding what it was for? I asked slowly. Martin leaned back in his chair. What do you mean? I remember senior year. My mom was helping me organize paperwork for college applications. She had me handwrite several letters, thank you notes for scholarship committees, personal statements that needed to be in my own writing rather than typed. She said handwritten letters were more personal, more impressive. The memory was crystallizing as I spoke. My mother sitting beside me at the kitchen table, dictating letters while I wrote. She would give me the general content and have me put it in my own words. I trusted her completely. She said it was all for college applications and scholarship opportunities. Martin made notes on a legal pad. So you believe you may have unknowingly transcribed this letter under the pretense it was for college applications? It's the only explanation that makes sense. I would never have voluntarily given up money for college. I took out $80,000 in student loans that I'm still paying off.
He pulled out another file. That raises additional concerns. According to our records, your parents submitted documentation showing that your college expenses were being covered by scholarships and family contributions. We have receipts they provided showing tuition payments made directly to Portland State. My blood ran cold. What kind of receipts? Martin handed me copies of payment confirmations, each bearing Portland State University letterhead and showing tuition payments of $12,000 per semester for 4 years. The payments were attributed to Chen Family Education Fund. This shows nearly $100,000 in tuition payments, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But I paid my own tuition with student loans and work-study money. You're certain of this? I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, navigating to my loan servicer account. Look, $84,000 in remaining student loan debt. If my parents had been paying tuition, why would I have loans? Martin studied my phone screen, then looked at the payment receipts again. Miss Chen, I think we need to examine all the trust's expenditures since 2016. For the next hour, Martin walked me through 7 years of financial records that told a story I never knew existed. The trust hadn't been dormant during my college years. It had been actively managed, with regular distributions and transactions that my parents had authorized as my representatives. Here's a transfer for $15,000 in August 2017, labeled Jessica's junior year housing deposit, Martin said, pointing to a bank statement, and another $8,000 that December for textbooks and educational materials. I stared at the entries. I lived in a shared apartment junior year and paid $400 a month in rent. I bought used textbooks and spent maybe $600 per semester total. According to these records, your parents were regularly drawing from the trust for your supposed college expenses, room and board, educational materials, even what's listed as academic enrichment activities. The pattern was devastating. Nearly $200,000 had been distributed from the trust over 7 years, all supposedly for my benefit, while I had struggled financially the entire time. My parents had been living off my inheritance while I survived on ramen noodles and student loan money. Is this legal? I asked. Martin removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. Technically, yes, if the beneficiary consents to paid trustee arrangements. But given what you've told me about the forged letter and your lack of knowledge about the trust's existence, we're looking at potential fraud." He pulled out another document that made my stomach drop. "There's also this, a request submitted last month to extend the trust management arrangement indefinitely, citing your continued need for financial guidance and concerns about your readiness for large-scale asset management." The letter was signed by both my parents and included a psychological evaluation, supposedly documenting my financial immaturity and tendency toward impulsive spending. The evaluation was dated just 6 weeks earlier and signed by Dr. Patricia Kellerman, a psychologist I'd never heard of, much less met. "They were planning to keep control of the money even after my 25th birthday?" I said, the full scope of their deception finally becoming clear. "It appears so. The request also included a provision to reduce your eventual distribution to $50,000 annually, rather than the full principal, with the remainder continuing to be managed for your long-term benefit." I thought about my phone call with my mother the day before, her surprise that the law firm had contacted me directly. They hadn't expected me to find out. The letter from Martin Whitman was supposed to go through them, like everything else had for 7 years. "There's one more thing," Martin said carefully. "The trust originally included provisions for emergency distributions if you faced genuine financial hardship. Your parents were authorized to provide additional funds if you experienced job loss, medical emergencies, or other crises." He showed me my bank records from the past year, which he had apparently requested as part of his routine trust oversight. According to these, there were several periods where your account balance dropped below $50. Once, you had a negative balance for 6 days due to overdraft fees.
I remembered that week vividly. My car had broken down, and the repair costs had wiped out my savings. I'd called my parents in tears, asking if they could help with the $400 mechanic bill. My father had lectured me about the importance of building an emergency fund and suggested I pick up extra shifts at the coffee shop. Meanwhile, they could have resolved my crises with a single phone call to Martin Whitman. "They watched me struggle," I said, more to myself than to him. "They had the power to help me dozens of times, and they chose not to." "It gets worse," Martin said quietly. "I pulled the records from your grandmother's original lawyer, who handled the trust setup. According to his notes, your grandmother specifically established this trust because she was concerned about your parents' attitude toward money." He handed me a yellowed legal memo from 1998. "Your grandmother apparently observed that your parents were overly focused on teaching harsh financial lessons and worried that they might prevent you from pursuing educational opportunities due to their philosophy about earning everything yourself." The irony was suffocating. My grandmother had created the trust specifically to protect me from my parents' extreme views about self-reliance, and they had used their control over it to enforce exactly the kind of financial hardship she tried to prevent. As Martin continued pulling documents from various files, a picture emerged of systematic deception that went far beyond simple mismanagement. This wasn't carelessness or misguided protection. It was a calculated scheme that had been evolving for years. "Your parents didn't just take money from the trust," Martin explained, spreading out a complex chart he'd created tracking fund movements. "They invested portions of it in their own business ventures." The documents showed that $150,000 from my trust had been loaned to Chen and Associates Accounting, my parents' firm, for office expansion and equipment upgrades. The loan terms were extraordinarily favorable, 1% annual interest with no specified repayment schedule. They used my inheritance to grow their business while paying themselves management fees and covering their own expenses under the guise of your educational costs, Martin confirmed. "It's actually quite sophisticated financial manipulation." He pulled out correspondence between my parents and their own financial advisor, David Kim, that had been copied to the trust file. The emails, dating back 3 years, discussed strategies for maximizing the extended management period and ensuring Jessica's continued dependence on family guidance. One email from my father to David Kim was particularly damning. Jessica's current financial situation is actually beneficial for maintaining trust control. Her struggles demonstrate the need for continued oversight, and her gratitude for small family loans keeps her from questioning larger financial arrangements. I read the sentence 3 times. My own father was strategically maintaining my poverty to justify controlling my inheritance. There's also this, Martin said, handing me a real estate document. 6 months ago, your parents used trust funds as collateral for a mortgage on a vacation home in Bend. The property is titled in their names, not yours. The beach house purchase had been a source of family celebration. My parents had invited me to visit their retirement investment, and I'd felt proud of their financial success. I'd even helped them move furniture, grateful for the occasional free weekend getaway that was the closest thing to a vacation I could afford. I had been furnishing my own family's vacation home with my own stolen money. How much of the original trust is left? I asked, afraid of the answer. Martin consulted his latest statement. Approximately $680,000 in liquid assets plus the accrued interest. However, the outstanding loan to their business, the vacation home mortgage, and the management fees have significantly reduced what should have been available to you. What should it have been worth? If invested properly and without the unauthorized distributions, your trust would likely be worth over $1.2 million today. The number hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't just stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars. They'd stolen my financial future, my security, my freedom to make choices about my own life. The most disturbing part, Martin continued, is that they've been planning to formalize this arrangement permanently. I found a draft proposal in their correspondence suggesting the creation of a Chen family foundation that would house your trust funds indefinitely with them as permanent trustees. He showed me their financial advisor's notes about the proposal. This structure would allow continued family control over Jessica's inheritance while providing tax benefits for Robert and Linda's retirement planning. Jessica would receive annual distributions but never direct access to principal. They had been planning to steal my inheritance forever, disguising it as family financial planning. My phone buzzed with another text from my mother. "Sweetheart, please call us. We're worried about you and want to explain our perspective. We love you so much."
I stared at the message, then at the mountain of evidence spread across Martin Whitman's desk. 7 years of lies, manipulation, and theft, all justified in their minds as love and protection. For the first time since reading that initial letter, I felt something other than shock and betrayal. I felt rage, clean, focused, and absolutely determined. They had stolen my 20s, my financial security, and my ability to make independent choices about my future. Now, I was going to take it all back. The first sign that my parents knew I'd discovered their deception came at 6:23 a.m. the morning after my meeting with Martin Whitman. My phone erupted with rapid-fire text messages, each arriving within seconds of the last. From Dad: "Jessica, we need to talk before you make any hasty decisions." From Mom: "Honey, there are things you don't understand about the trust fund situation." From Dad: "Martin Whitman called yesterday evening. We're disappointed you went behind our backs." From Mom: "Please don't let a stranger turn you against your family." From Dad: "We've scheduled a family meeting for tonight at 7 p.m. Don't bring the lawyer." The barrage continued for 20 minutes. By the time I finished reading them all, my hands were shaking. The tone had shifted from the worried, apologetic messages of 2 days ago to something far more demanding and controlling. They weren't asking for a conversation, they were issuing commands. When I didn't respond immediately, my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to my father's message. "Jessica, this silence is childish. We've been nothing but loving parents, and now you're treating us like criminals over a simple misunderstanding. Call us back in the next hour, or we're coming to your apartment." The threat was subtle but clear. Comply or face confrontation on their terms. I was still processing this when my supervisor, Carlos, called from Morrison's Coffee House. "Hey Jess, I got a weird call this morning. Someone claiming to be your father said you were having a family emergency and might need some time off work. He was asking about your schedule and seemed really concerned about your mental state." My stomach dropped. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing specific, but he was pretty insistent. Said something about you making impulsive decisions lately and that the family was worried about your judgment. He asked if we'd noticed any changes in your behavior at work." They were already beginning their campaign to undermine my credibility. By framing my discovery of their theft as erratic behavior, they could dismiss my accusations as emotional instability. 20 minutes later, my college friend Emma Rodriguez called. "Jess, your mom just called me out of the blue. She said you were going through something and might reach out to friends with concerning stories about your family. She wanted me to know that you'd been struggling with anxiety and might be prone to paranoid thinking." The coordination was sophisticated and immediate. Within hours of learning that I'd spoken to Martin Whitman, they had begun contacting my employer and friends to preemptively discredit anything I might tell them. "What did you tell her?" I asked Emma. "I told her I hadn't heard from you lately, but that I'd certainly listen if you needed to talk. But Jess, what's going on? Your mom sounded genuinely worried, but also, I don't know, kind of controlling." I found myself in an impossible position. If I told Emma the truth about the trust fund, would she believe me? Or would my mother's warnings about my paranoid thinking make her doubt my story? My parents had expertly planted seeds of uncertainty before I'd even tried to explain what they had done. By noon, they had escalated their tactics. My landlord, Mrs. Patricia Wong, knocked on my door looking uncomfortable. "Jessica, I received a call this morning from someone claiming to be your father. He said you might be having financial difficulties and wanted to know if you were behind on rent." "I'm not behind on anything," I said quickly. "I know that, dear. Your rent has always been on time. But he also mentioned something about being concerned for your well-being and asked if I'd noticed any unusual behavior. He seemed to think you might be in some kind of crisis." The message was clear. They were systematically contacting everyone in my life, painting a picture of instability and crisis that would make my accusations seem like delusions rather than facts. That evening, I drove to my parents' house in Beaverton, my car's engine making the rattling noise that I'd been ignoring for months because I couldn't afford repairs. The irony wasn't lost on me, driving my failing car to confront the people who had stolen the money that could have fixed it years ago. Their house looked the same as always, modest, well-maintained, the picture of middle-class responsibility. The Honda Civics in the driveway, the small but neat landscaping, the sensible porch furniture, everything was carefully curated to support their narrative of modest means and earned success. My mother answered the door with red-rimmed eyes and immediately pulled me into a hug that felt more like a restraint. "Oh, sweetheart, we've been so worried. Come in, come in. Your father made your favorite dinner." The dining room table was set with their good china, candles lit, my childhood favorite of beef stew and homemade bread waiting. It was a deliberate staging, designed to evoke memories of family warmth and safety. "Sit down, honey," my father said, his voice gentle but firm. "Let's start by saying how much we love you and how proud we are of the woman you've become." I remained standing. "Let's start by explaining why you've been stealing from me for 7 years." My mother's face crumpled. "Stealing? Jessica, how can you use such a harsh word? Everything we did was out of love, to protect you." "Protect me from what? From having enough money to eat? From being able to afford a reliable car? From pursuing opportunities instead of just surviving?" My father's expression shifted slightly, the gentle mask slipping to reveal something colder underneath. "You see, this is exactly what we were afraid of. The moment you learned about the trust, you became hostile and accusatory. This is why your grandmother's gift needed careful management." "Grandmother's gift that you've been using to buy vacation homes and expand your business?" "Now that's simply not true," my mother said,
her voice taking on a sharper edge. Yes, we borrowed some funds for business purposes, but that's sound financial management. The money was always intended to benefit the family. I am not the family. I am the beneficiary. The money belonged to me. My father leaned back in his chair, studying me with the calculating look I remembered from my childhood when I'd challenged his decisions. Jessica, do you remember what you were like at 18? You wanted to major in art history, for heaven's sakes. You had no concept of financial responsibility. So you forged a letter in my handwriting to steal my inheritance? We guided you toward a decision that was in your best interest, just like we've guided all your decisions since childhood. That's what parents do. The conversation continued for 2 hours, a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Every accusation I made was reframed as evidence of my instability. Every fact I presented was dismissed as a misunderstanding of complex financial matters that I wasn't qualified to judge. You're 25 years old and you work in a coffee house. You've never managed more than a few $100s at a time. What makes you think you're ready to handle nearly $1 million responsibly? Maybe I'd have been more financially successful if I'd had access to my education fund and living stipends. And maybe you'd be a spoiled trust fund child with no work ethic and no understanding of real life. My mother replied, they had an answer for everything, a justification for every theft, a way to make their greed sound like wisdom, and their manipulation seem like love. Over the following week, their campaign intensified in ways that left me questioning my own sanity. They had clearly spent years perfecting the art of control, and now they deployed every tool in their arsenal. My mother began showing up at Morrison's coffee house during my shifts, ordering elaborate drinks and sitting in the corner booth where she could watch me work. She'd smile and wave occasionally, projecting the image of a caring mother checking on her struggling daughter. But her presence was suffocating, a constant reminder that I was being monitored. Your mom comes in a lot, my coworker Sarah mentioned one afternoon. She always asks how you're doing and whether you seem stressed lately. She's really worried about you. The surveillance extended beyond the coffee shop. I noticed my father's distinctive silver Honda parked outside my apartment building multiple times. When I confronted him about it, he claimed to be in the neighborhood and wanted to make sure I was safe in that questionable part of town. They began involving extended family members in their campaign. My Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, called to express concern about what I was putting my parents through. According to her, my mother was losing sleep with worry about my mental state and my sudden hostility toward the people who've sacrificed everything for me. Your parents are such good people, Jessica. They've always put your needs first. I don't understand why you're attacking them now over some paperwork confusion. The phrase paperwork confusion became their standard description of the situation. Not theft, not fraud, not systematic deception, just a simple misunderstanding that had been blown out of proportion by my emotional instability.
My cousin Michael, whom I'd always considered an ally, called to share his perspective. Look, I get that you're upset about not knowing about the trust fund, but think about it from their side. They were trying to teach you independence. My parents gave me everything handed to me, and I struggled to find motivation for years. Maybe your parents' approach was actually beneficial. Even my grandmother's sister, my great-aunt Helen, weighed in. At 91, she was the family matriarch whose opinions carried significant weight. My mother arranged for her to call me, ostensibly to share memories of my grandmother Margaret. Your grandmother always worried that too much money too young would spoil you, Aunt Helen said in her wavering voice. She trusted your parents to use their judgment about when you were ready. Maybe you should trust them too. The isolation was systematic and complete. Every family relationship I'd ever relied on was weaponized against me. Every conversation became an opportunity for my parents to reinforce their narrative. I was ungrateful, unstable, and unfit to manage my own inheritance. The pressure began affecting my daily life in ways that made their claims about my instability seem prophetic. I couldn't sleep, replaying conversations and second-guessing my own memories. I made mistakes at work, spilling drinks and getting orders wrong. My hands shook when I tried to operate the espresso machine. Maybe you should take some time off, Carlos suggested after I broke a cup during the morning rush. You seem really stressed lately. I almost laughed at the irony. The stress of discovering my parents' theft was being used as evidence that I wasn't capable of handling money responsibly. My appetite disappeared. I lost 8 pounds in 10 days, existing primarily on the free pastries Morrison provided to employees. The weight loss made my cheap work clothes hang loosely, giving me a gaunt appearance that my mother pointed out with apparent concern whenever she saw me. "You're not taking care of yourself, sweetheart," she said during one of her coffee shop visits. "This whole situation is clearly taking a toll. Maybe we should make an appointment with Dr. Martinez, just to help you process these feelings in a healthy way." Dr. Martinez was the family physician who had treated me since childhood. The suggestion seemed reasonable on the surface, but I recognized it for what it was: another attempt to establish a medical record of my emotional problems that could be used to support their claims about my unfitness to manage the trust. Late at night, alone in my studio apartment, I began to wonder if they might be right. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe their management of the trust had been motivated by genuine concern rather than greed. Maybe I was too inexperienced to handle nearly $1 million responsibly. The doubt was poisonous and persistent. Had I really been struggling financially, or had I simply been learning valuable lessons about self-reliance? Was my anger about the deception justified, or was I being ungrateful for their protection? By the end of the week, I felt more isolated and confused than I had since the day I'd received Martin Whitman's letter. My parents had successfully made me question not just my accusations against them, but my own perceptions and memories. That's when I realized I needed help from someone outside the family circle, someone who couldn't be influenced by my parents' campaign of manipulation and control. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source: Mrs. Patricia Wong, my elderly landlord. 3 days after my parents had called her, expressing concern about my well-being, she knocked on my door carrying a steaming cup of jasmine tea and wearing an expression of barely contained indignation. "Jessica, dear, I need to tell you something," she said, settling onto my threadbare couch with the careful movements of someone who'd lived through 8 decades of human drama. "That phone call from your father troubled me more than I initially let on." I accepted the tea gratefully, my hands still trembling slightly from the stress of the past week. "What do you mean?" In my experience, when parents start calling landlords and employers about their adult children's mental state, it's usually because they're trying to control something that child has discovered. Her dark eyes studied me intently. My own parents tried similar tactics in 1962 when I inherited my grandmother's property in Chinatown. The parallel was so unexpected that I nearly spilled the tea. "Your parents tried to control your inheritance?" Mrs. Wong nodded grimly. Traditional Chinese families, especially in those days, didn't believe women should manage property independently. When my grandmother left me 3 buildings instead of my brothers, my parents spent months convincing everyone that I was too emotionally unstable to handle business matters. She pulled a small photo from her wallet showing a young woman standing proudly in front of a building with Chinese characters above the doorway. "They told my tenants I was having a nervous breakdown. They called my employer to express concern about my erratic behavior. They even tried to have me declared mentally incompetent. What did you do?" I documented everything. Every phone call, every conversation, every attempt to undermine my credibility. And I found allies, people who weren't part of their influence network. Her smile was sharp with remembered victory. "Would you like me to help you do the same?" For the first time in over a week, I felt something other than confusion and doubt. Here was someone who understood the specific tactics of financial manipulation, who had survived and triumphed over family members trying to steal her inheritance. "I don't even know where to start," I admitted. "We start with evidence," Mrs. Wong said decisively, "and we start with people your parents can't influence." Over the next 2 hours, she helped me create a systematic plan for documenting my parents' behavior and building a support network outside their reach.
Her first suggestion was both practical and brilliant. Record every interaction with them from now on. Oregon is a one-party consent state, she explained, pulling up the relevant law on her smartphone with the confidence of someone who'd researched legal protections decades ago. You can legally record conversations as long as you're a participant. Your parents' manipulation tactics will sound very different when played back to neutral parties. She also gave me the contact information for her nephew, David Wong, no relation to my landlord, despite the shared surname, who worked as a financial forensics specialist for a Portland accounting firm that handled fraud investigations. David has seen every type of family financial abuse imaginable, Mrs. Wong explained. He's also completely outside your parents' social and professional circles, so they can't pressure him to dismiss your concerns. David Wong's office was located in a modern building in the Pearl District, far removed from both my parents' suburban accounting practice and Martin Whitman's prestigious downtown law firm. When I met him the following afternoon, I was struck by how different he was from the family financial advisors I'd grown up around. Younger, more casual, and refreshingly direct in his communication style. My aunt filled me in on the basics, he said after I'd shown him the trust documents Martin Whitman had provided. This is textbook financial elder abuse, except you're not elderly, just systematically kept in the dark about your own assets. David spread the documents across his conference table, organizing them into categories with the efficiency of someone who'd analyzed countless similar cases. The good news is that your parents documented their own fraud quite thoroughly. The bad news is that unwinding this will require proving intent to deceive, not just poor financial management. He pointed to the forged deferral letter I'd unknowingly signed at 18. This is our smoking gun, but we need to establish a pattern of deception. Tell me about other times they might have had you sign things without fully explaining their purpose. The conversation unlocked memories I'd previously dismissed as normal family interactions. My parents had always been involved in my financial life, requiring me to sign various documents for my own protection throughout high school and college. They'd handled my tax returns until I was 22, claiming the process was too complicated for someone without accounting experience. They'd also managed my health insurance, car insurance, and even my cell phone plan, maintaining control over these practical aspects of adult life under the guise of family efficiency. They kept me financially dependent in ways I didn't even recognize, I realized as David took notes. I thought they were being helpful, but they were actually preventing me from developing independent financial relationships. David nodded. Classic control tactic. By maintaining themselves as intermediaries for all your financial interactions, they could monitor and influence every aspect of your economic life. He pulled out a timeline template and began mapping out 7 years of financial manipulation, from the forged trust deferral through their recent attempts to extend their control indefinitely. The visual representation was damning, a clear pattern of escalating deception and self-dealing that would be difficult for them to explain away as protective parenting. We need to document their current behavior too, David said. The calls to your employer and landlord, the family pressure campaign, the surveillance. This shows consciousness of guilt. They know what they did was wrong, or they wouldn't be working so hard to discredit you. He taught me how to set up a secure cloud storage account for evidence collection, how to use my phone's recording app effectively, and how to maintain detailed logs of every interaction with my parents and their allies. Most importantly, he connected me with other professionals who could help build an independent support network. Financial abuse thrives in isolation, David explained. Your parents' strategy depends on you having nowhere to turn for objective perspective. We're going to change that. The first addition to my team was Dr. Sarah Martinez, not to be confused with the family physician my mother had suggested, a psychologist who specialized in financial trauma and family manipulation. Unlike a traditional therapist, Dr. Martinez focused specifically on helping victims of financial abuse understand and document the psychological tactics used against them. What your parents are doing has a name,
It's called financial gaslighting, making you question your own perceptions about money and financial reality. The fact that you started doubting your own accusations shows how effective their techniques are.
She helped me understand that my physical symptoms, the shaking hands, lost appetite, and sleep disruption, were normal responses to psychological manipulation, not signs of the instability my parents claimed to be concerned about.
Victims of financial abuse often experience symptoms that their abusers then use as evidence of incompetence, Dr. Martinez said. It's a vicious cycle designed to maintain control. With my new support team in place, I began to see my parents' behavior through a completely different lens. Their manipulation tactics, which had seemed overwhelming when I was isolated, became predictable and manageable when I had objective allies helping me analyze them. The recordings proved especially revealing. When my mother called to suggest another family dinner to work things out, I captured her subtle threats and emotional manipulation in audio form. Her gentle, concerned tone couldn't mask the underlying message: comply with our version of events or face escalating consequences. Jessica, we're starting to wonder if you might be having some kind of breakdown, she said during one recorded conversation. Your behavior lately has been so out of character. Maybe you should consider taking some time off work, coming home where we can take care of you properly. When I played the recording for Dr. Martinez, she immediately identified multiple manipulation techniques, questioning my sanity, suggesting I was incompetent to work, and offering help that would actually increase their control over my life. Notice how she frames their concern in terms of what's out of character for you, Dr. Martinez pointed out. She's defining your normal personality as compliant and non-confrontational. Any assertion of independence becomes evidence of mental illness. David Wong was equally impressed by the evidence we were accumulating. Within 2 weeks, he documented over $300,000 in questionable trust transactions, including the vacation home purchase, business loans to their firm, and management fees that exceeded industry standards by 400%. They've been treating your trust like their personal bank account, he said, showing me a chart comparing their fee structure to legitimate trust administration companies. No reputable financial institution would charge 5% annually for basic trust administration. More damaging was his discovery of additional forgeries. By comparing my genuine signatures from college transcripts and loan documents with the various trust-related papers my parents had submitted over the years, David identified at least 6 documents that appeared to bear my forged signature. They didn't just fake one letter. They've been forging your consent for major financial decisions throughout your entire adult life. The evidence collection process was empowering in ways I hadn't expected. Instead of feeling like a victim of my parents' schemes, I began to feel like an investigator, uncovering the truth. Each new piece of evidence validated my perceptions and strengthened my resolve to seek justice. My confidence grew as other professionals confirmed what I'd suspected about my parents' behavior. Martin Whitman, initially cautious about making accusations against longtime clients, became increasingly supportive as David Wong's forensic analysis revealed the extent of their deception. I've been practicing trust law for 35 years, Martin told me during a follow-up meeting. I've seen family disputes over money before, but the systematic nature of your parents' deception is extraordinary. They've been running a sophisticated fraud operation while maintaining perfect reputations in the community. Even more validating was the reaction of professionals who'd known my parents in business contexts. When David Wong discreetly reached out to other accountants and financial advisors in Portland, several admitted they'd had concerns about the Chen family's approach to Jessica's trust, but hadn't felt it was their place to intervene. Your father mentioned several times over the years that you were financially immature and needed extensive guidance. But frankly, the amount of control they maintained over your affairs always seemed excessive for someone your age. As my support network expanded and the evidence mounted, I realized I was no longer fighting this battle alone. My parents had assumed that their reputation and social connections would protect them from serious scrutiny. They hadn't counted on me finding allies who were completely outside their influence network and professionally equipped to expose financial fraud.
The balance of power was beginning to shift. Instead of being an isolated young woman making wild accusations against respected community members, I was becoming the center of a professional investigation into systematic financial abuse. For the first time since receiving Martin Whitman's letter 3 weeks earlier, I felt strong enough to take the offensive. My parents had spent years building their case for controlling my inheritance. Now it was time for me to build mine for taking it back. The moment I decided to go on the offensive came on a Thursday morning when I discovered my parents had escalated their surveillance to a new level. David Wong called me at Morrison's Coffee House, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Jessica, you need to see this immediately. Can you come to my office during your lunch break?" When I arrived, he had printed out screenshots from a private investigator's report that had been commissioned by my parents' attorney. The document detailed my daily routines, work schedule, social interactions, and even my recent meetings with David and Dr. Martinez.
"They hired Thompson Investigations to follow you," David said, sliding the papers across his desk. "This report recommends establishing a pattern of erratic behavior and poor judgment to support a competency challenge." The invasion of privacy was staggering. The investigator had photographed me leaving David's office, documented my meetings with Dr. Martinez, and even noted the times I'd visited Mrs. Wong's apartment. They'd interpreted my evidence-gathering activities as proof of paranoid behavior rather than reasonable self-protection. "They're planning to have you declared incompetent to manage your own finances," David continued. "According to this report, they intend to petition for permanent guardianship over your trust based on your recent decline in mental stability." The audacity was breathtaking. My parents were literally using my efforts to reclaim my stolen inheritance as evidence that I was unfit to have it? "How did you get this report?" David's smile was sharp. "Thompson Investigations has a disgruntled former employee who's been concerned about the firm's willingness to take ethically questionable surveillance jobs. She copied their files before leaving and reached out to me after recognizing your name from some discreet inquiries I'd made in the financial community. This unexpected intelligence coup gave us advance warning of my parents' strategy and, more importantly, concrete evidence of their malicious intent. Instead of waiting for them to file competency proceedings, we could take preemptive action." "It's time to flip the script," David said. "Instead of defending yourself against their accusations, we're going to force them to defend their actions." We scheduled an emergency meeting with Martin Whitman for that afternoon. When I arrived at his office, he was already deep in conversation with a woman I didn't recognize. Tall, sharp-featured, with silver hair, and an expensive suit that screamed authority. "Jessica, I'd like you to meet Rebecca Sterling from the Oregon State Bar's Ethics Investigation Division," Martin said. "After reviewing the evidence David Wong provided, I felt obligated to report potential violations of fiduciary duty and attorney misconduct." Rebecca Sterling's handshake was firm, her gaze penetrating. "Miss Chen, what your parents have done goes beyond simple family financial disputes. We're looking at systematic fraud, forgery, and abuse of legal processes. I'm here to discuss filing formal charges." The meeting that followed was surreal. Instead of being a young woman making accusations against her respected parents, I was suddenly a victim in a criminal investigation being conducted by state authorities. Rebecca Sterling outlined charges that could include fiduciary fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit theft, and abuse of legal guardianship processes. The private investigator report was particularly damaging to their case. It shows premeditation to use legal proceedings as weapons of intimidation rather than legitimate concerns about your welfare. Within 2 hours, we had drafted a comprehensive complaint that would freeze all trust assets pending investigation and require my parents to account for every transaction they'd authorized over the past 7 years. More importantly, we would file first, putting them in the position of responding to official charges rather than making accusations against me. "Are you ready for this to become very public, very quickly?" Rebecca Sterling asked, as we prepared to submit the paperwork.
Once these charges are filed, your parents' reputation in the community will be seriously damaged regardless of the outcome. I thought about the years of financial struggle, the student loans I was still paying, the opportunities I'd missed while they profited from my inheritance. I'm ready. My parents' response to the state ethics complaint was swift and vicious. Within 48 hours of the filing, they had retained Harrison and Associates, one of Portland's most aggressive family law firms, and launched a coordinated counterattack that targeted not just me, but everyone in my support network. The first casualty was Morrison's Coffee House. My father, leveraging his position as an accountant for several local businesses, orchestrated a whisper campaign suggesting that employing someone under investigation for making false accusations against family members created liability risks for small businesses. Carlos called me at 6 a.m. Saturday morning. "Jess, I'm really sorry, but I got calls from 3 different business clients yesterday. They're all concerned about the situation with your family. Corporate is pressuring me to put you on temporary leave until things get resolved." The economic warfare was immediate and personal. My parents were using their professional network to cut off my income at the exact moment I needed financial resources to fight them legally. But they had underestimated my new allies. Mrs. Wong immediately offered to cover my rent for as long as needed, while David Wong arranged for me to do freelance research work at his accounting firm at twice my coffee shop hourly wage. Financial abusers always try to create economic pressure to force compliance, Dr. Martinez explained when I called her in a panic about losing my job. Your parents are following a predictable playbook. The fact that they're escalating so aggressively actually strengthens our case. Their legal strategy was as aggressive. Harrison and Associates filed a motion claiming that I was suffering from delusional parasitosis with financial fixation, essentially arguing that I was having paranoid delusions about money that made me dangerous to myself and others.
They supported this claim with carefully edited excerpts from the private investigator's report, testimony from family members about my recent personality changes, and a psychological evaluation performed by Dr. Richard Thornton, a psychiatrist who specialized in competency determinations for wealthy families. Dr. Thornton has never met you, Rebecca Sterling pointed out when we reviewed their filing. This evaluation is based entirely on secondhand reports from your parents and their selected witnesses. It's clinically worthless, but it could be persuasive to a judge who doesn't understand the dynamics of financial abuse. The hearing for their competency challenge was scheduled for the following week, giving us less than 7 days to prepare a defense. My parents were clearly hoping to overwhelm me with the speed and intensity of their legal assault. Their public relations campaign was equally sophisticated. They reached out to local media with a story about a troubled young woman making false accusations against loving parents who had sacrificed to help her. The Portland Tribune ran a small item about family financial disputes that portrayed me as an ungrateful daughter attacking parents who had, quote, guided her financial decisions with care and wisdom. Reading the article made me physically ill. They had managed to frame their theft as parental love and my pursuit of justice as family betrayal. "This is exactly what happened to me 40 years ago," Mrs. Wong said when I showed her the article. "My parents convinced half of Chinatown that I was an ungrateful daughter trying to steal property from my brothers. The community pressure was almost unbearable. How did you survive it?" I stopped caring what people thought and focused on what I could prove. Truth has a way of winning out, but only if you're strong enough to endure the lies in the meantime. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Dr. Richard Thornton, the psychiatrist my parents had hired to evaluate my mental competency. On Tuesday morning, 3 days before the scheduled hearing, he called Rebecca Sterling's office directly. "I need to withdraw from this case immediately," he told her. "After reviewing the actual evidence rather than the summary provided by Harrison and Associates, I cannot in good conscience testify that Ms. Chen is mentally incompetent." Rebecca Sterling put the call on speaker so I could hear his explanation. "The documentation Mr. and Mrs. Chen provided was highly selective and misleading.
When I requested the complete trust records and forensic accounting reports, I found evidence of systematic financial fraud that would justify anyone's distress and anger. Dr. Thornton's withdrawal was devastating to my parents' case, but his next revelation was even more damaging. Harrison and Associates asked me to prepare a competency evaluation without conducting a personal examination based solely on their characterization of Ms. Chen's behavior. This violates every ethical standard in my profession. This information allowed Rebecca Sterling to file an additional complaint against Harrison and Associates for attempting to suborn perjury and abuse legal processes. The ethics violation would be investigated separately, but it immediately undermined the credibility of my parents' entire legal strategy. More cracks appeared when David Wong's investigation uncovered internal conflicts between my parents about how to handle the crisis. Their email communications, which we obtained through discovery proceedings, revealed fundamental disagreements about their approach. Your mother wanted to negotiate a settlement that would give you partial access to the trust while maintaining their oversight, David explained, showing me printed emails between my parents and their lawyer. Your father insisted on fighting for complete control, even if it meant publicly exposing their management of your finances. The tension between them was evident in increasingly heated email exchanges. My mother wrote, "Robert, this is getting out of hand. Maybe we should consider Jessica's demands and work out some kind of compromise before this destroys our reputation completely." Her father's response was telling. "We've invested too much in maintaining control to back down now. If Jessica gets access to those funds, she'll discover the full extent of our business arrangements. We have to see this through." His admission that they were fighting to prevent me from discovering the full extent of our business arrangements suggested there were additional financial improprieties we hadn't uncovered yet. David Wong immediately began investigating my parents' business more thoroughly, looking for connections between their accounting firm and my trust that went beyond the loans we'd already identified. What he found was stunning. Chen and Associates Accounting had been using my trust funds as operating capital for nearly 3 years, cycling money in and out of the trust to cover payroll, rent, and business expenses. They disguised these transactions as short-term loans, but the pattern showed they were essentially using my inheritance as their business credit line. They're not just guilty of poor trust management, they've been operating a sophisticated money laundering scheme using your funds to float their business operations.
The discovery of this additional fraud completely changed the dynamics of our case. We were no longer dealing with family financial disputes, but with serious criminal behavior that could result in jail time for both my parents. Harrison and Associates recognized the shift immediately. Their aggressive posture began to soften as they realized their clients were facing potential federal charges for money laundering and wire fraud. The first settlement offer arrived on Wednesday afternoon: full return of my trust funds, plus interest, in exchange for my agreement not to pursue criminal charges. The proposal also included a gag order preventing me from discussing their financial management publicly. "It's a significant offer," Rebecca Sterling admitted, "but it's also an admission of guilt. They wouldn't be offering full restitution unless they knew they couldn't defend their actions in court." I had less than 24 hours to decide whether to accept their offer or continue fighting for complete justice. The choice would determine not just my financial future, but whether my parents would face consequences for years of systematic fraud and manipulation. For the first time since this battle began, I held all the power. The question was how I intended to use it. The decision came to me at 3 a.m. on Thursday morning, as I sat in my studio apartment, staring at the settlement offer that could resolve everything quietly. $850,000 plus accumulated interest, full control of my trust, and my parents walking away with no criminal consequences. On paper, it was everything I'd fought for. But something Rebecca Sterling had said kept echoing in my mind. Your parents aren't the only people who've done this.
There are probably dozens of other families in Oregon alone where parents are systematically stealing from their children's trusts and inheritances. I thought about Mrs. Wong's story from the 1960s, about other victims who might be too isolated or intimidated to fight back. If I accepted this settlement with its gag order, my parents would never face public accountability for their actions. They could continue operating their accounting firm, managing other people's family trusts, potentially victimizing more young adults who trusted their parents' financial guidance. At 3:47 a.m., I texted Rebecca Sterling, "No settlement. I want full justice." Her response came within minutes. "I was hoping you'd say that. We have more evidence that came in tonight." The new evidence was a bombshell that transformed our case from family financial fraud to a much larger criminal conspiracy. David Wong had been quietly investigating other clients of Chen and Associates Accounting, looking for patterns of questionable trust management. What he found was systematic. "Your parents have been running this scam on at least 6 other families," Rebecca Sterling explained when we met Thursday afternoon. "Similar patterns of forged beneficiary letters, unauthorized management fees, and business loans using trust funds as collateral." She spread files across the conference table, each representing a different family whose children had been systematically defrauded by my parents. The Thompson family's daughter had been told her grandparents' trust was performing poorly, while my parents paid themselves management fees and used the funds for business expansion. The Rodriguez family's son had unknowingly deferred his inheritance for 8 years, while my parents borrowed $200,000 for commercial real estate investments. The total amount of stolen funds across all families is approaching $3.2 million. Your case broke this entire operation wide open, David Wong added. The scope of their crimes was staggering. My parents hadn't just betrayed me, they'd built an entire business model around stealing from young adults who trusted them to manage family wealth responsibly. This revelation completely changed the legal landscape. The U.S. Attorney's Office was now involved, investigating federal wire fraud and money laundering charges. The Oregon Department of Justice was pursuing criminal conspiracy charges. The State Board of Accountancy was conducting its own investigation into professional misconduct. Most importantly for me, we now had leverage that went beyond my individual case. My parents couldn't simply pay restitution to make this disappear, because they were facing criminal liability for a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme affecting multiple families. Thursday evening brought the first sign that their unified front was cracking. My mother called me directly, bypassing their lawyers and ignoring explicit instructions not to contact me without legal representation present. "Jessica, please, we need to talk," she said, her voice shaking. "Just you and me, no lawyers, no recordings. I'm begging you." I met her at a small coffee shop in southeast Portland, far from both our neighborhoods. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in the past month, gray circles under her eyes, hands trembling as she stirred her latte. The composed, controlling woman who'd orchestrated my financial manipulation was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely frightened. Your father wants to fight this all the way to trial," she said without preamble. "He thinks we can still win if we stick to our story about protecting you from poor financial decisions." "And what do you think?" She stared into her coffee cup. "I think we're going to prison and our business is going to be destroyed, and your father is too proud to admit what we've done." For the first time in my life, my mother looked vulnerable and human rather than manipulative and controlling. "Jessica, I know you probably can't forgive us, but I need you to understand that it started with good intentions."
Stealing nearly $1 million started with good intentions? Borrowing money from your trust to expand the business started with good intentions, she corrected. We genuinely believed we could invest it more successfully than the conservative fund management Martin Whitman recommended. We planned to return everything with better returns. When? When you turned 25. That was always the plan, to have grown your inheritance significantly by the time you gained control. I studied her face, looking for signs of continued deception. Then why the forged letters? Why all the lies about my financial incompetence?
Her composure finally cracked completely. Because we lost money. The commercial real estate investments your father insisted on making failed. Instead of growing your trust, we diminished it significantly by 2019. The confession poured out of her in a rush. My parents had borrowed from my trust to invest in strip mall developments and rental properties, convinced they could generate higher returns than traditional investments. When the commercial real estate market softened, they'd lost nearly $400,000 of my inheritance. We panicked. We couldn't admit what we'd done, so we started taking management fees to slowly replenish what we'd lost. But the fees weren't enough, so we borrowed from other clients' trusts to cover your losses, planning to pay everyone back when the market recovered. A Ponzi scheme? We never thought of it that way, but yes, essentially. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. By the time you turned 24, we owed money to 6 different families, and the only way to keep everything afloat was to maintain control of all the trusts indefinitely. The psychology was almost understandable, a series of increasingly desperate decisions to cover up an initial mistake, each choice making the situation worse until they were trapped in a web of fraud they couldn't escape. Why are you telling me this now? Because your father wants to continue fighting, which means this all comes out in court anyway. And because... She paused, struggling with words. Because I'm tired of lying. I haven't slept properly in 3 years, Jessica. Every day I wake up knowing we've stolen from you and other families, and I can't live with it anymore. My mother's confession accelerated everything. Rebecca Sterling immediately arranged for her to give a formal statement to federal investigators offering cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. The information she provided filled in the remaining gaps in our case and implicated several other professionals who had helped facilitate the fraud. My father's reaction to his wife's cooperation was explosive. According to the investigators monitoring their communications, he accused her of destroying everything we've worked for and throwing away our family's future for Jessica's selfishness. The family dynamic that had controlled my entire life was finally collapsing under the weight of their crimes. Harrison and Associates withdrew from representing my parents on Friday morning, citing irreconcilable differences in legal strategy between their clients. By Friday afternoon, my father had retained criminal defense attorney Marcus Webb, while my mother was working with a different lawyer focused on negotiating a plea agreement. The weekend brought a parade of developments that felt almost surreal. The Portland Tribune ran a front-page story about the Chen family trust fraud scheme, complete with details about the multiple families affected and the sophisticated methods used to steal inheritance money. The Oregon State Bar announced it was investigating several attorneys who had allegedly helped prepare forged documents. Most satisfying was the announcement that the State Board of Accountancy had immediately suspended my parents' professional licenses pending criminal proceedings. Chen and Associates Accounting was effectively shut down, with clients being notified that their files would be transferred to other firms under state supervision. Monday morning brought the final settlement negotiations. With my mother cooperating with investigators and my father facing federal charges alone, the power dynamic had shifted completely in my favor. The terms were comprehensive and punitive. Full restitution of $1.1 million to my trust, including interest and investment returns I should have earned. Additional compensatory damages of $200,000 for the emotional distress and lost opportunities caused by their fraud. Forfeiture of their vacation home in Bend, which would be sold with proceeds going to other victim families. My father would plead guilty to federal wire fraud and money laundering charges, serving a minimum of 18 months in federal prison, and my mother would plead guilty to conspiracy charges with a sentence of 6 months home detention and 1,000 hours of community service working with financial fraud victims.
Both would be permanently banned from serving as trustees, financial advisors, or fiduciaries of any kind. Their business assets would be liquidated to pay restitution to all affected families.
It's complete justice, Rebecca Sterling said as we reviewed the final agreement. Financial, professional, and criminal consequences that match the severity of their crimes. But the most important provision was one I'd insisted on: no gag order. I retained the right to speak publicly about their fraud, to help other victims identify similar patterns of abuse, and to advocate for stronger protections for beneficiaries of family trusts. The plea hearing took place on a rainy Tuesday morning in federal court. I sat in the gallery watching as my parents stood before Judge Patricia Morrison to formally admit their guilt. My father's voice was barely audible as he recited the required confession, acknowledging that he had willfully and knowingly engaged in a scheme to defraud multiple families of inheritance money through forgery, misrepresentation, and unauthorized financial transactions. My mother's plea was more emotional. She turned toward me before speaking, tears streaming down her face, and said, "I'm deeply sorry for the pain we've caused Jessica and the other families we've hurt. There's no excuse for what we did." Judge Morrison's sentencing remarks were pointed and harsh. The victims in this case trusted you with their most precious assets, their children's financial security and family legacies. You violated that trust in the most fundamental way possible, stealing not just money, but years of these young people's lives and opportunities. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Justice had been served, but it came at the cost of permanently destroying my relationship with my parents. The people who had raised me, taught me to ride a bike, and celebrated my achievements were also the people who had systematically stolen from me for years. Mrs. Wong was waiting for me on the courthouse steps. "How do you feel?" she asked as we walked toward her car. "Free," I said, surprising myself with a certainty in my voice. For the first time in my adult life, I feel completely free. The practical implications of victory were immediate and life-changing. My trust fund was restored within 48 hours, giving me financial security I'd never experienced. I could afford to quit the coffee shop job I'd struggled with for years and pursue opportunities that matched my education and interests. More importantly, I could help other victims. 3 families affected by my parents' fraud reached out within days of the news coverage, asking for advice about recovering their stolen assets and pursuing their own justice. The vindication was sweet, but the real victory was simpler. I had stood up to people who tried to control and manipulate me, and I had won. Not just financially, but psychologically and emotionally. I was no longer Jessica Chen, the struggling coffee shop worker living paycheck to paycheck. I was Jessica Chen, the woman who had taken on sophisticated financial criminals and held them accountable for their crimes. That identity felt more valuable than any amount of money they could have stolen from me. 1 year later, I stood in my new office overlooking Pioneer Square, watching the city bustle below through floor-to-ceiling windows. Chen Financial Advocacy had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. A team of 6 specialists helping families navigate trust fraud and financial abuse recovery. My phone buzzed with a text from our latest client, a young woman from Vancouver whose uncle had stolen $200,000 from her education fund. "Thank you for believing me when my family wouldn't. We got everything back plus damages." These victories felt more meaningful than any trust fund ever could. Each family we helped represented someone who wouldn't have to endure years of gaslighting and manipulation like I had. The business had attracted attention from Washington, D.C. Next week, I'd testify before Congress about closing loopholes in trust oversight regulations. The coffee shop worker who'd once counted quarters for groceries was now shaping federal financial crime policy. Mrs. Wong visited the office monthly, bringing jasmine tea and sharp observations about human nature. "You've turned your wounds into wisdom," she said during her latest visit. "Your grandmother would be proud."
The foundation now operated across 5 states, having recovered over $8 million for victims of family financial fraud. But the number that mattered most was smaller. 37 families reunited with their stolen inheritances and the knowledge that they weren't crazy for questioning people they'd trusted. The psychological healing proved more complex than the financial recovery. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that rebuilding trust after family betrayal requires reconstructing your entire understanding of relationships. She explained that you had to learn that the people who raised you were systematically deceiving you. That changes how you process every human interaction. Dating remained complicated, though for different reasons now. Some people struggled with my public story, others with my wealth, and a few with my unwillingness to minimize what my parents had done. But I'd learned these reactions revealed more about them than about me. My extended family relationships evolved slowly. Aunt Susan eventually apologized for pressuring me to handle things privately. My cousin Michael admitted that he'd been wrong to suggest family loyalty trumped accountability.
I didn't understand that what they did was criminal, not just a family dispute, he said recently. You were right to fight back. My mother attempted reconciliation twice, sending letters through intermediaries. I haven't read them. Dr. Martinez reminded me that I'm not obligated to forgive or forget to accommodate someone else's guilt. My father never reached out at all. According to mutual acquaintances, he'd moved to Arizona and taken a bookkeeping job, permanently banned from any fiduciary responsibilities. His absence felt like relief rather than loss. The most profound change was trusting my own judgment. My parents had spent years training me to doubt my perceptions and defer to their superior financial wisdom. Recovery meant learning to trust my instincts, even when others disagreed. This experience taught me that real love doesn't require silence about abuse. The people who claim to protect you while secretly harming you aren't protecting you. They're protecting themselves. Financial abuse isn't just about money. It's about power and control. When you refuse to be controlled, you reclaim more than stolen assets. You reclaim your right to make informed decisions about your own life. To anyone facing similar betrayal, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. If people discourage questions, ask more. If explanations don't make sense, seek outside perspectives. You deserve honesty and respect, regardless of family relationships. The hardest lesson was that love without honesty isn't love at all. My parents claimed every lie protected my well-being, but real protection would have meant treating me as capable of handling the truth about my own inheritance. Today, everything I have, my business, relationships, home, was built on authentic foundations. No one manages my life in secret or makes decisions about my future without my knowledge. That sense of genuine autonomy is worth more than any trust fund could ever be. The scared young woman who discovered her parents' theft became someone I'm proud to be, not because of the money I recovered, but because I found the courage to fight for what was right, despite overwhelming pressure to stay silent. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's harmful behavior, even when that someone is family. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.